Welcome to the week 3 Contender Series breakdowns. And saying that we're already in the third week of this whole season. And again, I love breaking down these Contender Series fights for you guys. I wanted to get this out for you guys yesterday, aka Sunday, but I was really struggling to tap in to start getting into the research. So I don't want to force myself in these spots. Again, if I'm not there in a mental state, a proper mental state, obviously my breakdowns are not going to be as effective or, accurate in a sense. So I took the day off, got back to work here on Monday, and finally got the breakdowns out. And overall, mediocre card in terms of betting side of things, but there could be some hot prospects that end up coming off of this show. There is one very fun fight that I'll talk about once we get there, but for the most part, a lot of squash matches, it seems like. All right, as I have been with the last couple Contender Series breakdowns, I'd like to quickly recap the previous card and just give out my quick thoughts on some of these matchups, whether we bet the fight or not. Just some quick thoughts. Now, the first matchup up was Ramiro Jimenez going up against Tommy Quozi. That was a squash match if I've ever seen one, right? Quozi just should not have been in there. I get he had an 8-0 record going into that fight, but anybody with two eyes could see, or even with one eye, could see that that was a severe mismatch, hence why Jimenez was able to just butcher him from jump and then finish him less than 3 minutes into that first round. Horrible matchmaking. Not sure how that even got sanctioned, but Jimenez went out there and did the damn thing and easily got a contract. Then Josh Hockett against Guilherme Uriel. A lot of people kind of knocking Hockett for that approach that he took, but I thought it was a brilliant approach. I get it's the Contender Series, but he did what he needed to do to stay away from the danger of Uriel. And then once he saw that Uriel was really starting to slow down, he picked it up and he eventually got the finish. So again, this shouldn't just be quick finishes and just, that's how you get a contract. I don't mind seeing a game plan play out, even if it's a little bit boring, especially in that case where he knew his opponent was going to slow down and then from there really start to pick up the steam and get him out of there. So good performance from Hockett. I look forward to seeing what he brings to the table in the UFC. Could find himself ranked, within his first couple of UFC fights because of his wrestling alone. But once he starts fighting better strikers that can stop his takedowns, that's where we'll start to see whether his ceiling is low, medium, or high. Then the next matchup, very fun fight here between Lewis Lee Scott and Kaushik Saikumar. Very unfortunate that Scott missed weight, but I don't think it played a whole lot of a role in that matchup. I don't think Saikumar's wrestling is that great, but he was still able to get the fight into the grappling situations here and there. But even if Scott was able to cut that extra half pound, it would not have made a difference. He was far superior in every realm of that fight, from his submission defense to his striking, and then obviously just putting on the display of strikes the way that he did. Very impressive. And obviously Dana was, fully aware of that as well. So I was very impressed from the performance from Scott there. Again, as most people say, Indian fighters are usually not the best base for mixed martial arts, or being from India is not the best base. And unfortunately, it's come up true more often than not at the highest level. But credit to Scott. Great work, gets the TKO as well after putting together a very solid performance for those first 10 minutes. And rightfully so, gets the contract. Again, making weight is the number one job. Very unfortunate that he missed by half a pound. But if it was more egregious than that, then I could see a little bit of pushback from Dana. But given his performance, showing every facet of the mixed martial arts game, it was very impressive from Scott to see him get the contract there. Next up was the middleweight fight between Cam Roston and Brandon Holmes. I really expected Holmes to be the better striker, but it seemed like he was a little bit stuck in mud. After fending off a few of the grappling attempts from Roston was able to get to his striking and then eventually utilize a bit of a speed advantage, it seemed like, but also a little bit more being a bit more comfortable inside the cage. And that's where he was able to constantly hurt Holmes and eventually get him out of there. So good performance from Roston. I don't have that high of a ceiling for him. Credit for getting the contract, but a guy that I don't really expect to make it all that far in the UFC. I also think he did already get his first UFC assignment on UFC Perth, and I think he's fighting Andre Petrosky. If he sticks with the striking, that's a winnable fight, but we'll see if he can get off on that on Petrosky. And then the main event, another mismatch of sorts, maybe not as bad as the Jimenez and Quozi fight that started off the card, but it was clear that Delano was a superior fighter all around. I think I took the under 2.5 in that matchup and ended up paying for it, as Exposito's durability held up way better than I expected it to, but Delano beat him from pillar to post the entire time, made it look easy. Exposito landed a few shots, but for the most part, it was Delano in check there. And, he is a guy that could just burst right into the rankings in the UFC featherweight division. He is that skilled. He is that experienced. And I look forward to seeing him finally make it to the UFC. So all in all, I believe there was 5 contracts given out last week. Much deserved for all of those fighters, I'll say. In the previous week, I think there was only 2 contracts given out. And again, that was the right call for that card. And for week 2, it was also the right call to give all 5 of those guys a contract. I think Delano and Lee Scott, maybe Hackett could be high-level fighters there. Jimenez obviously has some promise, but Roston is the guy that I am lowest on out of that batch. All right. There's your week 2 recap there. In terms of my own bets for that card, I went plus 1.11 units, 14% ROI. I missed on Brandon Holmes, a straight shot there, but I was able to hit plus 225 on Louis Lee Scott by KO. I did have a chalky parlay between Jimenez, Hackett, and Lee Scott that cashed for at minus 111. I hit the Josh Hackett under 1.5 at minus 241. And then, as I said, I missed on the Delano and Exposito under 2.5. So again, we still come out on the profit. Happy about that, and hope that we can continue that this weekend, maybe even a little bit more, or this week, I should say, with a little bit more profit. All right, we got 5 fights to talk about for this week 3 Contender Series card, and it kicks off in the heavyweight division in a relatively short notice matchup for both guys. Now, Dante Johnson coming in at minus 245 takes on Darian Abbey, who comes in at plus 195. And this is a matchup between 2 guys that are streaking. Obviously, Johnson 5-0 as a pro, and then Abbey on a 3-fight winning streak, most recently coming off of a knockout victory over former UFC fighter Alex Nicholson. Now, we'll start off on the Dante Johnson side of things, who's about a week removed from his 1-year anniversary from turning pro in the mixed martial arts world, and he's gone out there and done the same thing every single time. All of those wins coming in the first round, coming by knockout, showcasing his athleticism, speed, and power. He utilizes a ton of movement and feints from distance to eventually crash that pocket when his opponent isn't expecting him to, and that's where he lands his big shots and often puts his opponents away. This guy's very athletic, shredded like you've never seen, and often does a great job in terms of utilizing his speed advantage to overcome some of these bigger and taller fighters he goes up against. He started his career at heavyweight, moved down to light heavyweight. Although this fight takes place at heavyweight due to the short notice nature of it, I expect if he makes it to the UFC, he's going to go back down to light heavyweight, and even teased maybe going to middleweight because of the size disadvantage. He'll even find himself at 205. But it's all about getting to the chin of his opponents. I have big question marks should he get pushed into later rounds, and especially if his knockout power doesn't work early, because of how much energy he uses in those early spots. Even when he's not throwing those big strikes, it's just a constant movement, utilizing his hands, the constant feints, which also expends a lot of his energy. So, he's yet to be tested. The best opponent he's gone up against was a 3-0 Fury FC product who he just knocked out last month. Now he's coming in and facing a more experienced and probably the most resistance he'll ever face here in Darian Abbey. Now, Abbey has one of those underappreciated records unless you really look into it. He's 7-4 on a 3-fight winning streak, but those 4 losses have come to very recognizable names, from guys like Tim Johnson to Mitchell Sipe, Steve Mowry, and even Eduardo Perez, who made it onto the Ultimate Fighter a couple of seasons ago. Outside of that, he's going out there utilizing good wrestling, good power from the tall, lanky frame that he normally brings to the table. He's just a little bit slow and plodding at sometimes, and that's where guys with more speed can really get the advantage in him over him. But I think his ability to mix the martial arts is going to be very beneficial for him, and he's probably one of the best best heavyweights on the regional scene. His durability, a little bit of a question mark, especially the way that Tim Johnson was able to get him out of there. And even in one of the recent fights that he won, he got dropped very badly, but was able to quickly recover and get back into his dominant position to eventually win that fight. In this matchup against Johnson, it's hard to get behind the minus near 250 for Johnson, considering the experience advantage that Abbey holds and some of the resistance that we'll actually see from him there. If Johnson's unable to get him out of there within that third or fourth minute, things could start to look a little bit shaky for Johnson, especially if Abbey looks to utilize his strength advantage, push Johnson against the cage, maybe look for some takedowns. The thing is, I don't think Johnson will be held down that long should he get taken down in the first couple minutes of this fight. And then from there, I think he'll be able to use his speed and power advantage, and he'll be able to land those big shots on Abbey and probably get him out of there, just as he has done against his past 5 opponents. It's just tough to trust at this chalk, because if this leaks into round 2, the experience of Abbey could come through here, and that knockout power of Johnson will start to diminish, especially with him, fighting a big heavyweight like Abbey, where he's really going to have to hone in on that power to try to get the knockout. I think he gets it early, but I would not trust him at this line, and I wouldn't mind anybody taking a shot on Abbey, especially at that plus 200 line. But the prediction is going to be Johnson by first round knockout. All right, next up, the best fight on the card by far. There is no doubt about it. Very fun striking battle here between Christian Perez, who comes in at plus 220, going up against Manuel Sousa, who comes in at minus 280. Now, Perez originally comes from the Combate Global promotion, where the majority of his fights have taken place under that banner. He's done a great job in terms of putting together the record that he has. He's very consistent in terms of the power that he throws with the combinations. His lone defeat came, I believe, 4 years ago, when he was unable to deal with the consistent grappling game of his opponent. But it's clear since then he's done a great job in terms of putting things together and really shutting down that aspect should anybody take that approach against him. He's even shown some offensive wrestling and grappling improvements in his game, which makes him even more dangerous as an all-around fighter. But he's riding a 5-fight winning streak right now. It's unfortunate he's been out of competition for over a year and a half at this point. His last MMA fight was back in December of 2023. He had a karate combat fight in July of 2024, but he's pretty much been on the shelf ever since. He used to be a part of the Goat Shed team down there in Miami, which I think is kind of dispersed. So he's kind of been gym hopping. I believe he even spent time at the Shoot to Box Diego Lima camp. I could be wrong on that. I might be getting my fighters mixed up there, but still a very solid fighter, good combinations, very slick striker, good counter striker as well. I love everything that he brings to the table in terms of the striking game, and we know his durability is definitely up there with the Mexican heritage that he brings to the table. It's really hard to get those Mexicans out of there, and Perez is another example of that, especially with some of the big shots I've seen him eat in the past. He's going up against a tough prospect here, Manuel Sousa, who I originally came across when he was on the Challenger Series for PFL, which is pretty much a ripoff of the Contender Series. That was back in 2023, where he was able to pick up a split decision over Paulo Laial, I believe the guy's name was, or Laia. Very close fight, but Manuel was able to get the win. He was going up against a very tall and lanky fighter that he was struggling to get his striking going against. Had some grappling success as well. He was 9-0 going into that fight, and then he followed that up with a nasty knockout victory over Tim Wilde, where he showcased what he can be like at his best with that vicious Muay Thai approach that he brings to the table. He was then put in a somewhat of a number 1 contender matchup under the Bellator banner against Archie Colgan, who is another undefeated prospect, but Colgan mixed it up well enough with the grappling, with the wrestling, knowing that Sousa starts to slow down a little bit in high activity fights, especially in that third round. Colgan did a great job in terms of controlling the majority of that fight and handing Sousa his first pro loss. He was able to bounce back in the LFA back in March, where he was just battering on his opponent for 15 minutes, stopping the takedowns of his opponent, showcasing his nasty Muay Thai work inside the clinch, and battering his opponent to win that fight on the scorecards. At his best, Sousa operates at distance with his striking, good combinations, nasty leg kicks, has a good Muay Thai clinch, as I said as well, and his defensive grappling is clearly improving to the point that he starts utilizing it offensively, just as his opponent this week in Christian Perez. Now, going into this matchup, pre-tape, I was fully on the Sousa side, right? I was happy that he's finally getting this Contender Series opportunity. He's a guy that deserves to be in the UFC. He has a very nasty striking game that can make him have an impact right from jump. But then once I finished the tape on Christian Perez, I was kind of surprised to see the odds as wide as they are. Like, I get it. Sousa has a regional knockout victory over Maurizio Huffy, who's absolutely starching people in the UFC right now. But that was a while ago, right? Christian Perez, very good durability, very good chin, improved grappling, even though I doubt Sousa is going to look to take this fight to the grappling realm. And if this turns out to be a pure striking battle, Perez can hold up to Sousa, in my opinion. If Perez doesn't get starched within the first 5 minutes here, which I highly doubt, even, without me saying that, this is going to be a competitive striking battle where both guys can have a lot of success landing counters, landing combinations of their own. I think Sousa just has a little bit more zip on his shots and a little bit more viciousness, if that's what you want to call it, which is why I'll end up leaning with him to win this matchup, but definitely not at a near 75% clip. Perez is going to make this very, very competitive, and I don't even mind taking a small shot on him to try to pull off the upset. On a chalk-heavy card, Perez is one of the better underdogs that could potentially pull off the upset here. So the official prediction will be Sousa by decision, but I will take a little bit of a flyer on Perez because I think the odds are just way off here. Perez is a skilled striker, and he could definitely take advantage of some of the times that Sousa starts to slow down, especially if he can keep a high pace in the early goings of this fight. So Sousa by decision is the official prediction, but Perez is definitely worth a shot as a big underdog. All right. Next up, we got Abdul Rahman Yakhyaev coming in at -900, going up against Alec Lorenz, who comes in at +600. Now, Yakhyaev comes in as the Aries FC light heavyweight champion and has made short work of both of his Aries FC opponents. That first matchup was actually for the vacant title, where he clipped his opponent, jumped onto a guillotine, and quickly got the submission. Then in his first title defense, he was able to utilize the striking a little bit, then eventually get to the grappling, work to the back of his opponent, and force the rear naked choke. He has Chechen roots, but I believe he trains out of Germany. Very good striker, but I think it's his grappling where he does his best work. He does a good job in terms of with his entries on the takedowns and then establishing that top control. But from there, he started to get better in terms of transitioning to more dominant positions where he's often able to get to a spot where he can get that submission or get that TKO finish as well. I think this kid is very skilled and very good, but I wouldn't mind seeing him down at 185 pounds, but we'll see how long he can be successful at 205. Now, he's going up against Alec Lorenz, who I knew without a doubt was eventually going to make it to the Contender Series, especially if he continued to fight for LFA and they continued to give him some softballs. He had finished all of his opponents in the first round until his last matchup, where he went up against a regional veteran in Ryan Parker, who really pushed Lorenz. I think he won that first round. He was winning that third round as well until Lorenz switched a position, eventually got the back of Parker and forced a tap from him. But that was the most resistance we've seen Lorenz faced. Outside of that time, he got knocked out in 33 seconds by Abbey, who kicks off this Contender Series card. But Lorenz is a guy that utilizes his physicality, his power, and his explosiveness to his advantage by just throwing big shots at his opponents and knowing that they'll eventually fall. But his cardio is obviously a big question mark against guys that will not just fold over like Ryan Parker did in that third round. And he's a guy that can clearly be taken advantage of. I know he's training with the MMA lab. I know he's improving at a steady rate, and he might be able to land a quick Hail Mary shot in this matchup. But for the most part, I think he is outskilled and outmatched in this fight, bar none. And I completely agree with the -900 line on Yakhyaev. Look for Yakhyaev. In my opinion, the best way for him to take this matchup is to take it to the ground right away and then assert his top side pressure, eventually opening up a finishing spot for him, as I don't think Lorenz will be able to get out of those bad spots. Yakhyaev could also counter him from distance and try to just snipe him with the big shot to put Lorenz away that way too. But I think he'd be best served to try to take this to the ground and avoid that early knockout finishing pressure from Lorenz. So I think this fight finishes under 1.5. I know the under 1.5 is chalk to shit, but I think it comes through. That covers a potential Hail Mary knockout from Lorenz, but it covers the obvious result, which is Yakhyaev getting it done early here. So give me Yakhyaev round one, probably TKO or submission, one of those two, but I think it happens under 1.5 rounds. And this is a complete mismatch. Similar to what we saw in the Cuozzi and Jimenez fight last week, this is a mismatch, but Lorenz has that Hail Mary shot. This could end up looking like, what was it, Yunesi Dubain and Shannon Clark from last year, where Dubain just landed that big shot. But Yakhyaev does not have as bad striking as Shannon Clark did. He's way more well-rounded, and I'd be surprised if he gets clipped here. So, again, Yakhyaev under 1.5. All right, next up, fun matchup here between Damon Wilson, who comes in at plus 265, going up against Marcio Barbosa, who comes in at minus 340. Now, I've been following Damon Wilson since about late 2022 under the Cage Warriors banner. He was a guy that utilized a lot of wrestling, a lot of top control, breaking his opponents down and really getting some good success there. But then when he was facing guys that were able to stop his takedowns and force him to strike, that's where we saw him come up short in his 9-2 record. Those losses came to Tobias Harila, who's one of the more entertaining fighters under the Cage Warriors banner, although I think he's been jumping around to different promotions now. And then John De Jesus, who's probably never going to make it to the UFC, but is one of those sturdy and durable and tough regional veterans that obviously caused a lot of issues for Damon Wilson. But it seems like after that John De Jesus loss, he took off about a year and came back and pulled off 3 straight victories, the last 2 of which came by knockout, showcasing that he's starting to trust his striking a little bit more. In the clinch, he does a great job in letting go with his knees, and that's where he's often been able to overwhelm his opponents and get the TKO. But I want to see that on display against fighters that will clearly test him in the striking realm, which I don't think he has been in his last 3 fights. With his confidence growing in the striking, that will obviously help his wrestling as well, to be able to, throw some heavy hands and then mix in some takedowns behind that. That will definitely help him in the longevity of his MMA career, especially as he takes on tougher competition than what he's been going up against as of late. But he's going up against a very, very tough Brazilian prospect here, and Marcio Barbosa, who earned his 15th first-round victory last time around in his 16 overall pro wins. I believe one of those fights he won by decision. I can't recall exactly, but all of his wins mostly come in that first round. He overwhelms his opponents by stalking them with nasty Muay Thai combinations, and then he lets go with big power and eventually puts them away. He's very strong with his striking, and his takedown defense usually holds up pretty well in that early going until he eventually puts his opponents away. His 2 losses both came in the second round, showcasing his effectiveness really starts to dwindle as fights start to go longer. And only one of his 15 first-round finishes have reached that 4th minute, showcasing that like those first 3 minutes is usually hell and high water for a lot of his opponents. Throws nasty combinations. His last loss actually came to eventual UFC signee Gabriel Santos, who's obviously done very solid things in the UFC thus far. And that loss was 3 years ago, and he's 3-0 since then. So it would have been nice to see him a little bit more active as of late, but at least it's given him this Dana White Contender Series opportunity. He's a BJJ black belt and a brown belt in luta livre, but we don't usually see that on display. It's all about the striking, it's all about the power, and I don't expect that to change on the Contender Series platform. Now, I want to give Wilson the benefit of the doubt here, but I think he's going to struggle with the speed, power, and agility of Marcio Barbosa in this early going. I think we'll see Barbosa put together those punches well. I think we'll see him shuck off the takedowns of Wilson, maybe threaten with a guillotine if Wilson gets a little bit too desperate with the takedowns. But for the most part, I expect Barbosa to walk him down, land those big shots, and I think he eventually gets him out of there. Similar to the Dante Johnson fight earlier on the card, it's hard to get behind the chalky price tag on Barbosa, knowing that his cardio and gas tank could be a little bit of an issue should Wilson somehow survive that first minute. So I'd rather look at the under 1.5 or Barbosa knockout props to try to get a better line than that minus 340 money line. I'm going to go Barbosa round 1 knockout, but a little bit of a sprinkle on the Wilson round 2, round 3 prop could prove fruitful. But I think Barbosa just kind of gets it done early here and gets Wilson out of there in that first round. All right, that brings us to the main event of this week 3 card, and it goes down between Trent Miller, who's coming in on short notice, coming in at plus 325, going up against Ryan Gandra, who comes in at minus 425. Now, Miller was expected to compete this past weekend on the LFA card against Jake Woodley, but this short notice opportunity presented itself, and he gets it and hopes to make good on it so he can make it to the UFC. He was actually a little bit of an underdog to Jake Woodley, so take that for what you will. He's an Extreme Couture product who's put together an 8-2 record since turning pro back in December of 2022. He was also 6-0 as an amateur. He started his pro career 5-0, although I really think that last win in that streak was a fortunate situation for him. I can't pronounce the name of the guy that he was facing. I think it was a Nigerian fighter, but it was, I believe that Nigerian fighter was also a minus 220 favorite that night, and it was because of the striking advantage he held over Miller, and he was piecing Miller up for about 2.5 to 3 minutes before he went for an ill-advised takedown that Miller was able to slap on the guillotine and force the tap. So that really saved Miller that night. But he eventually ended up losing, club and subbed by a 10-7 opponent in his following matchup. He pulled off a quick win over a 1-0 fighter and then fell short against Buddy Wallace, who's a very tough regional fighter. And we saw, Miller not have much success against Wallace. Wallace, I believe, eventually finished him that night. Miller, very physical, very athletic, good power, a little bit stiff with his striking, decent wrestling, showcases good top pressure against guys that have like almost no defensive grappling, as we saw in his last matchup. But a guy that I think is not as good as a guy that should be getting this Contender Series opportunity. Good power early, but again, I think he will get picked apart by better strikers, and I think he's facing just that here in Ryan Gandra. Now, Gandra made his second walk to the LFA cage back in November, and he was able to take his opponent out, I believe, pretty quickly as well. I believe that was it was about against Valdemir Calvo, I believe the guy's name was, a Cuban wrestler who couldn't get off on any of his wrestling, was forced to strike with Gandra, and from there, Gandra really picked him apart and eventually dropped him numerous times and got the TKO stoppage there. He's finished 5 of his 7 wins, mixed up his training camp a lot from training with Paulo Costa, going to the Shoot to Box Diego Lima camp as well. Very nasty striker. He's 7-1, rides a 6-fight winning streak. Like I said, finished 5 of his 7 wins. Very slick striker. Has very sneaky trips and throws from the clinch position. Good takedown defense, like I said, especially what he showcased in his last victory over a tough wrestler. He's a BJJ brown belt, as well as a brown belt in judo, but he's used to... and he's also a guy that used to compete at heavyweight and light heavyweight, and now the rest of his career has mainly taken place at 185 pounds since 2023. Early 2023, I should say. I think he's a slicker striker here. I think he could stop any of the takedowns that Miller might try to implement here. I think this ends up being a battle where both guys try to let go with their punches to see who ends up coming out on top. But I think Gandra has a little bit more finesse to his shots, a little bit faster of a striker as well, and I think he'll be able to land down the pipe and hurt Miller early and often in this matchup, and I think that eventually leads to him getting that finish. The under 1.5, not a bad look. I'm going to be looking at early Gandra props, maybe round 1 KO or just round 1 straight up in case he gets that club and sub as well. But, I don't think Miller's up to snuff here. He could land that Hail Mary shot similar to what I said about Alec Lorenz in a fight earlier on this card, but I'd be very surprised. He'd need a miracle for that really to happen here. So I'm going to go Gandra and Gandra early. There you guys go. Contender Series Week 3 broken down for you guys. There is no other events that I'll be covering this week, with the exception, there is a CFFC card going down. I don't want to study the entire card, but I do have an interest in the main event between Richie Lewis and Benny Orozco. My pre-tape lean is Benny Orozco. He is a very, very fun, skilled fighter, and I think he has good enough scrambles to really fight and compete against Richie Lewis, who's obviously a very high-level wrestler, but I don't think Orozco will give up dominant position for too long. He might even be able to snatch up a submission. He might be able to get more damage off there as well. If he is an underdog, I'll likely be shooting on that. Again, this is all pre-tape. If you want to know whether I end up pulling the trigger on Orozco, you can check out the MMALOTN Patreon page. Otherwise, I'll see you guys again more than likely on Sunday for Week 4 of the Contender Series breakdowns. And then obviously we'll be breaking down the next UFC card, which I believe is UFC Paris, which goes down on September 6th, I believe the date is. So again, I'm taking this week to chill out, do a bunch of archive updates, and then slowly get started on the next week's card. But I need to take it easy. I've been really killing it as of late in terms of the work that I've been doing and really not giving myself enough time to really just chill and relax and rest. So we'll be light on the content this week. So I'll see you guys again next week. Good luck on all your action. See you guys then. Peace.